Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock, and we want to go ahead and get started. I see that we've got some folks in the waiting room, so we'll let them enter, but we'll go ahead and get started with today's presentation. So welcome, for many of you, welcome back. You've been with us now for 3 weeks in a row, and we greatly appreciate it. So on behalf of myself, I'm Jody Waterhouse, and I'm with the Multidisciplinary Center on Aging on the CU Anschutz campus. And our co-hosts, our colleagues down at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs Aging Center, also send a big welcome. We're thrilled to have you all here participating in the Emotional and Mental Health webinar series. This is our spring session, so we have 4 sessions this spring, and then we'll take the summer off, but come back strong in the fall with a whole new set of topics and webinar sessions for all of you to enjoy. So watch your email for that announcement later this summer. I'd also like to thank Denver Public Library for being our community partner to help us host this Emotional and Mental Health webinar series as well. Throughout the presentation, if you think of a question for our presenter, which we highly encourage dialogue between you and certainly our expert presenters that we have during these sessions, go ahead and type that in the chat room for me. I'm going to be monitoring the chat room for our presenter today, and then we will get to questions following her presentation. So we want to make sure that we get to everyone's questions, so make sure you put that right into the chat room. Also, if you can leave your microphones and cameras off while the presenter is presenting, then feel free if you want to turn them back on during the question and answer period. It just avoids any sort of distractions that might happen during the presentation. A reminder that next Thursday, May 6th, is our last session of spring 2021. I don't know about you, but I can't believe it's almost May. This year has flown by. It's hard to believe that we're almost on the cusp of summer here, but thrilled that next week we will be hosting Maintaining Healthy Cognitive Living with Dr. Tara Carlisle. So excited to wrap up the session with a very, very important topic. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Alyssa Kolva is a clinical psychologist whose research and clinical work has focused on helping adults cope with chronic illnesses to live much better while coping with these extraordinary stressors that so many have in their lives. Her research focuses on better assessing psychological distress in medical illness and evaluating the impact of psychotherapy interventions. So today she's going to be talking to us a little bit more about adding that structure, flexibility, and purpose, which we all need so much right now in our lives. So with that, please help me welcome Dr. Kolva.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you all today. I was just saying to Jody before we got started, so I am a clinical psychologist and I'm a health psychologist. So I really focus on that intersection between mental health and physical health and how we cope with challenges related to physical health. But I'm also kind of in my personal life, I'm switching jobs right now. So I've been a psychologist at the Cancer Center at CU Anschutz, and I'm moving over to the VA next month to start a new role. And so I've been, for the last almost 2 weeks, I've been off. So I've been having to, as I put this talk together, look at these strategies and use them in my own life. So I want to thank the Center on Aging for also helping me to structure up my last few days, because I probably would have been languishing a little bit more if it weren't for thinking about all these things, about how we add structure to our life, how we engage in habit and routine, and how that can help us. So it's nice to practice what you preach. So today, let's see. Ooh, why is this not? Okay, there we go. Our goals for today, we're going to talk about the importance of routine and structure in our lives, particularly in the context of the last, 15 months or so. So we'll talk about kind of how this last year has really challenged us with regard to structure and routine. We'll talk about how structure connects with this concept of resilience, which I know kind of forms the foundation of this webinar series. And then we'll talk about how do we add structure to our lives, right? How do we identify the things we want to add to our lives? How do we plan? How do we, and how do we make these changes worth it for us? How do we make them meaningful? And then my goal kind of for everyone today is to really, for each of you, to think about something that you want to implement in your life, right? Something that you can do that will help you to move closer to the things that really matter to you, that will help you to live your lives more fully. So that's my goal for this, because I think it's, I'm a researcher. I love to read articles. I love to talk about research findings, but this stuff really only matters if we can take it into our lives and use it to help, us all to live better. So I want to start by just taking a few minutes for us all to just really kind of come into this space, to get centered and think about an intention, for the next, 55 minutes or so, right? So if you feel comfortable, I know cameras are off, but I'm going to ask you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable. If not, you can just take a softened gaze, kind of at the computer screen or at the floor in front of you. Take a moment to become aware of your body and space, aware of your breath, aware that you have taken this hour today to learn something that will help you to better engage with your life. Just take a moment to reflect on that. And then I'm going to ask you to imagine with me. I want you to imagine that I have a magic wand. And this wand is truly magical. When I wave this wand, I can remove barriers. I can remove those things that get in the way of us living the lives that we want. Okay. When I wave this magic wand, all your doubts, painful emotions and feelings and thoughts, they no longer have an impact on you. Okay. So I'm going to wave my wand. What would you do differently in your life if these barriers were not there? What would you start doing? What would you stop doing? What would you do more of or less of? How would you behave differently? If we were watching you on a video of your life, what would look different? And just notice what comes to mind. There's no need to judge it. There's no need to evaluate it. Just notice what comes to mind. So now I'm going to ask you to open your eyes, come back into this room, into this space. And if it's helpful, jot down an idea or two that came up while you were doing the exercise. And I'm just going to ask you to hold on to that idea over the course of our time together today. And we may be revisiting it a little bit more. Okay. So I don't really need to tell you that 2020 was a difficult year, right? And that many of those challenges have continued into 2021, right? We have all had to make adjustments to our routines. We've had to cancel trips, stay inside, not see our loved ones, right? Even, a routine as simple as grabbing a coffee at the coffee shop in the morning. For many of us, that had to change, or at least look really different than it did before, right? That's before we even get into kind of the health impact of this pandemic. And we know that older adults have been disproportionately affected by the adverse effects of the pandemic, having more severe complications, higher morbidity, mortality rates. We've all had to adapt to, meeting virtually, and while there may be some advantages to that, I wish I could see your faces without kind of crashing or overwhelming our internet system, right? That we've all had to adjust to telemedicine and, seeing our families over Zoom rather than in person. And this has led to increased feelings of isolation that can exacerbate underlying mental health conditions or things that have always been hard for us. However, one of the things that was interesting when we're looking at some of the literature that's coming out about the impact of the pandemic on mental health, and this is a November 2020 report by Vahia and colleagues, that said, despite this kind of bearing the heavy weight of the pandemic, older adults may actually be more resilient than their younger colleagues or counterparts. And there's some evidence that older adults are more resilient to the mental health effects of COVID-19, which is promising. And I think we want to harness that as we move forward. Throughout the pandemic, we've been talking a lot about resilience. Okay? And the American Psychological Association defines resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. So such as family or relationship problems, health problems, or workplace or financial stressors. So we've all had to be more resilient this year. One of the things that I've been turning to just as for coping in my personal life, the New York Times has been running a series of articles on resilience in the pandemic. And it's really interesting if you look through them, they kind of match kind of a lot of the the waves of emotion that we've been feeling throughout the pandemic. One of the ones that was really helpful for me last summer, was talking about, resilience is great. I just wish it wasn't the only option, right? That we're having to be resilient all of the time. It'd be nice to just be regular sometimes, and just kind of getting tired of being resilient. But I think, we also look at, what are those skills or strategies that we can use to support our resilience, so we're not having to just kind of carry it on our backs all the time. And one of the things that actually just came out, I think in the last month, was talking about the importance of routine on resilience and the importance of structure, really, as a critical resilience skill. Yeah, so structure tends to be a good thing for us, right? Essentially, life is a series of routines, right? Our body is regulated by our circadian rhythm, right? We have times where we're more, prone to sleeping. We have times when we're more alert. Our bodies are organized on structure and routine. It fundamentally organizes our lives, and as human beings, we depend on it. And without routine and structure, we can feel aimless. Like we're just drifting through our days, we're drifting through time. So the research on routine and structure is really positive, right? So there are numerous health benefits, both for physical health and mental health, right? When people are engaged in routines, they generally report lower levels of stress, better sleep, just generally better physical functioning. There's a 2019 article by Arlinghouse and Johnson that started off by just examining the phrase "an apple a day keeps the doctor away," right? As an example of the benefits of habits, right? Saying that if we take something that's, kind of like generally a good health behavior, eating an apple, right? Apples are good for us. They've got vitamins, there's water in there, fiber, right? And then we do it over and over again, right? We identify behaviors that are in line with our goals, and then we do them regularly. And this creates a lifestyle change. Right? Some of the major research on the benefits of structure for health follows the structured day hypothesis. And this really came out of looking at changes in the health of school children over the course of the year. So looking at that, during the school year, when kids are getting up around the same time every day, when they're following routines, going to school, they tend to be engaged in better health behaviors than over the summer when things are less structured. And over the summer, kids tend to gain more weight. They're not moving as much. So it's, these findings really, gave support to the importance of structuring our time. And I think we can probably all come up with examples of, when we're on vacation, when we fall out of our routine, our health behaviors may change. I would probably argue that there are other benefits to that. When we go on vacation and we're eating at restaurants more, when we used to do those things, there are also benefits to our emotional health to doing that. So, we can talk about that more. There's no one right answer in what you should incorporate into your routine. But we do want to keep an eye on good health behaviors. Okay. So how long does it take to establish a habit? And it is interesting. There's all sorts of, things you can find over, on the internet about how long, does it take to really change behavior. But some of the major studies say that it takes an average of 66 days, so about 2 months to really form habits. So these are things that we have to practice, right? These are not things that we're just going to flip a light switch and change our lives, right? That these are things we work towards. In general, I think when you think about the things we want to change in our lives, most adults usually say it's, we come up with things like diet and exercise, right? We want to move more. We want to change the way we eat. It generally takes a little bit longer to make those changes around physical activity than it does around our diet. But researchers have found that, it is possible to change our behavior through repetition, through committing to a change and practicing it. One of the things they also found is that, mistakes are okay. Lapses are okay. They are normal. They happen. We're all going to have days where we just want to kind of cozy in on the couch rather than put on our running shoes or our walking shoes, right? We're all going to have days where, we want to share a cake with our family, right? And that's good for us. And these are not going to break your efforts towards behavior change. Right. So I think, one of the things that's interesting, and I wanted to kind of pull back a little bit, is why do we even need this talk, right? Why do we need to talk about adding structure, right? We know structure is good for us, right? We know it reduces our stress, improves our sleep, helps our bodies to work, generally in the way we want them to. It's good for us, right? So why don't we just do it? Right? I mean, I didn't impart any new information to any of you when I said that apples are good for us, right? Right? We know plant-based diets are good for us, right? We know exercise is good for us, right? I'm not blowing anyone's mind here, right, by saying those things. But we struggle to do them consistently, right? And that I think it is important to know that, that's not laziness. That's not lack of motivation. I think it's knowing that as human beings, oftentimes we have to overcome some evolutionarily, hardwired urges, right? That, our caveman selves, if there was food available, we were going to eat it, right? We benefited from eating foods that were higher in calories, higher in fat. That would help us to get through the winter, right? We benefited from conserving energy, right? From not moving around all day when we could sit still, right? So that's part of us, right? There is this, initial kind of hardwired urge to take the elevator, even though there's stairs right there, right? I think the difference is, our average lifespan isn't 30 anymore, right? We're living longer. We're looking at connecting with long-term goals rather than just what's going to help me to get through this winter, or how can I get the most calories in my body today? So we are balancing this kind of clash between short-term and long-term goals, right? So it's hard to say, you know what, my couch is cozy. I've been wearing my sweatpants all day. I've got Netflix. I'm just going to stay inside and burn through this series. It's hard to say, no, I'm going to get up. I'm going to put on my running shoes. I'm going to go out. I'm going to sweat. I'm going to feel uncomfortable. I might feel sore, right? There's an initial urge to be comfy. But, for our long-term goals, we know that getting out and being active will benefit us, right? We know what we want to do in the long term, but short-term impulses tend to get in the way. So how do we actually make these long-term changes? And one of the things I'm going to suggest for us today is that we want to connect to something bigger, right? We want it to be about more than just, okay, I'll huff and puff walking up the stairs rather than taking the elevator. We want it to be, I'm connecting with something that's larger, right? We don't want to establish routines just for the sake of establishing routines, right? Structure for structure's sake doesn't mean much, right? We don't want you just going through the motions here. And I think, for those of you who attended the webinar on mindfulness, right? We want to be present. We want to be connected. And we want to do the same thing when we're establishing habits and routines, right? We want them to be meaningful. We want them to connect us to the things that matter, the things we value, the things we stand for. Right. And this is not an easy topic, right? The question of what matters, what is meaningful, right? What's purposeful in our life. I mean, this is a major existential issue, right? This is something that can be a little distressing, something that we sometimes shy away from. But I think we also want to, just as there are these, urges and drives to stay comfortable and to, how the reward center of our brain lights up when we eat sugar, right? We want to connect with another kind of human urge or drive. So here we want to draw on the work of psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. And he is the author of Man's Search for Meaning, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Through his work, he developed a school of psychotherapy that is based on the idea that human beings are essentially meaning-seeking creatures, right? We are driven by this will to meaning, right? And that this is something that, exists, through our last breath, that we want to connect with meaning and purpose in life, okay? And that this is a human phenomenon. So I think let's harness this as a way to help us connect with our larger goals, okay? So connection with meaning, there isn't just, one shining meaning out there. When I was a pre-doctoral research fellow in New York, and we were doing some studies on meaning in life in the context of living with serious and chronic illness. And our patients who would come in, they'd be randomized to our meaning-centered group. And oftentimes they'd come in and they'd look at us and they're like, okay, so what is it? What's the meaning of life? Right? Like, we've got it. And maybe we'll give it to you. But that's not really the case. Meaning is something that we make. Meaning is something that we create, that we connect to. It's individually determined. We create it for ourselves. So I am going to ask you, and I'm not going to expect everyone to come up with the answers today, right? But, thinking about asking yourself, what do I really want? What really matters to me? What do I stand for? What are those things in our lives that give us a sense of purpose and meaning and vitality? Okay. And so some of the things we can look at are our relationships, the roles we play in life, being a partner, being a sister, a brother, a mother, father, grandmother, grandfather, friend, neighbor, right? It may include our relationships with religion or spirituality, things that, feel greater than us. It might be connection with nature or art, music, the things we love to do. It may even be a connection with our own stories, our own legacy in life. But I think really taking some time to think about what are these things that really matter, and see what comes up to you for you. There's no things that should come up. There's no right answer. But I think looking at what tends to come up naturally, and just noticing that without judging it, and then using that as a guide for the things we put into our routines, the habits we decide to form. Okay. So once we've, figured out the meaning of life, right? That's step one. Step two, what do we do with it? Right? And I don't, I think these are big questions, and I mean, they're not light. But I think, it is really important to look at what are those things that are guiding us? What are those things that we can align, our behaviors behind? And once you have a few of those things, I want to encourage everyone to, start to come up with a plan, right? We don't want to create structure on the fly, right? It deserves planning and dedicated energy. Right. So, and I think on your handouts, you actually have a little kind of like a weekly calendar. And one of the first steps in, in creating your routine or starting to build structure is to look at what are the things that you do, right? Over the course of the week, what are the activities you engage in? Right? Jot them down. Oftentimes we're not even aware of all of the things we're doing over the course of a week, right? And then just, write that all down. And again, like doing it just without judgment, just these are the things I do. And then you can look at, are these things a good use of your time? Are these things that are going to get me closer to those things I identified as meaningful, right? If they move me closer, great, keep them. But if they're things that hold you back, right? If being a part of, being an active and a friendly neighbor is important to me, and I find myself staying inside all day, maybe that's not getting me close to that goal. Maybe I want to be sitting on the porch having a cup of tea in the morning rather than having it, in my living room so I can wave to people, so I can smile at people as they walk by, right? So really looking at these activities, and if they're in line with where you where you want your life to go. And so looking at what are the things you can eliminate. Right? And I think, then you can start to think about what are the things that you'd like to add or change. Right? And it is important, and we'll talk about this more when we talk specifically about goal setting. But you want these things to be, realistic, right? If I am somebody who loves to stay up late, right? And I love to read, and, maybe I like to watch a program that's on late at night, or maybe that's just like the time where I feel peaceful. I'm probably not going to set, getting up early or, exercising at 5 a.m. as my goal, right? Or as something that I want to add into my routine. Right? We want to identify a few things, that we can add to our routines, and start to make these changes. Let's see. Okay. And so when we make changes, it is important to start slowly, right? We don't want to flip a light switch and just say, like, tomorrow my whole life is going to be different, right? Some of us may be guilty of that. Like, on a Sunday night, being like, okay, when I wake up tomorrow, I'm just going to like drink green juices, and I'm going to exercise for an hour and a half every day. And then I'm going to read all those books that I've been, neglecting, and right? We want to just kind of ease our way into behavior change. We want to start slowly, right? Because it tends not to work when we try to change everything all of a sudden, right? And this is especially true, with exercise and physical activity. It's even more true when we're living with a health condition, right? That may bring with it pain and fatigue, right? And other side effects. So we talk a lot about activity pacing as a helpful strategy, about saying, when we make changes, we want to aim for about the same level of activity every day. Okay. So, I think one of the kind of the traps that we tend to fall into is that, we get motivated to make change. Maybe we have a lot of energy and enthusiasm. And so we make a lot of changes. This happens to me every time I decide to get back into running, right? Get a new pair of running shoes. I lace them up. I've got my plan of where I'm going to go. And I probably should start by running a mile, but I'm feeling good. And so I'll run 4.5. And then the next day, I don't feel great, right? I'm creaky. My hips are sore, and so, do I get up and run again the next day? No, right? I wait. I take a rest day, and then I take another rest day, and then I take another rest day, and then I throw my hands up in the air because it's been too long, right? And I was so sore after doing it that first time, right? So it's about saying, let's, start slow and be consistent, right? Even if you could go 4 miles, go 1. And then the next day, do another one. And then the next day, do another one. So kind of when we're changing our behaviors, it's one of those things where, like, on days where we feel low, we want to generally do, push ourselves to do a little more. But on days we feel good, we want to pull back a little bit to avoid this roller coaster, right? Because not only does that roller coaster lead to, like, spending a lot of energy and then feeling really fatigued or a lot of pain, right? That tends to happen. But it also brings some kind of cognitive challenges with it, right? We start to judge ourselves for going too hard or for being tired and not being able to keep up with things, right? So, and, one of the things I'd love for you to take away from this talk is about the importance of kind of being kind and gentle with yourself when we're making changes, right? This is not an all or nothing thing, right? That doing something is meaningful. right? Making that change matters. You don't have to do it perfectly, right? These processes take time. So, but we do want, and I feel like I wouldn't, I might lose my, membership as a health psychologist if I didn't, encourage you to add some exercise into your structure as you're thinking of things, right? That, exercise is probably the closest thing we have to a magic pill. When it comes to health, that it's good for our mood, it's good for our sleep, it's good for our bodies. So, generally we want to move more. But again, like I said, I'm not, this is not like a news flash. We all know exercise is important. And I think there have been a lot of challenges over the last year about how we do integrate activity into our lives, especially, coming off, being ordered to stay at home, right? How do we get moving again? So, how do we feel safe again being outside? One of the things that, I was listening to an interview with an author named Louise Penny. Some of you may know, she writes mysteries. And so she was doing an interview, and she was over in the UK where they had, much longer and kind of more strict lockdowns than we had over here. And she was talking on this podcast about just kind of how she's been coping with the pandemic. And she said, well, actually, and she's in her 60s. I think also she's writing a book with Hillary Clinton now. But she talked about how she started running during the pandemic. And the interviewers were asking her, they're like, oh, that's so great. And she's like, yep. And I run, and I run about a 5K every day. And she said, but it's really hard because we're not really supposed to leave our homes. And they're like, well, how do you do that? And she's like, I've been running in my apartment. And they're like, oh, so on a treadmill? And she's like, nope, I am running in my apartment. I run 5 kilometers every day in my condo. And she's like, I run around the kitchen island, and I run through the rooms, and I have a little, and she's like, and I'm wearing a path on the carpet and the floor. So I think it is showing that, like, when these are things that really matter to us, that we really want to do, we can make that happen. This is just a slide I wanted to include about just, when we talk about exercise, because exercise tends to form like the basis of so many of the, of our goals about behavior change, that we don't want to just add, exercise one time during the day, right? We want to stay as active as possible over the course of the day. And many of you have probably heard the saying that sitting is the new smoking, right? That as that we tend to spend a lot more of our time sitting, and that's linked to negative health outcomes. And so this slide here just really shows, the relationship between activity and cancer risk, right? And that so for people who are getting up and standing up and moving more, even if it's not vigorous exercise, that tends to be better for us, for our cancer risk, and I think a lot of cardiovascular health, is linked to just kind of getting up and moving. So I just say for everybody else, even if you have another call after this, when we get off the call today, to just stand up, walk around a little bit. I think this has been, particularly true during, the pandemic, in the time of Zoom calls, where we just click from one to the next over the course of the day, and we're just not moving around as much as we used to. Okay. Yeah. So when we're writing down writing down your new structure and routine, you want to be thinking about sleep. You want to be thinking about good hygiene behaviors. The importance of just kind of taking a shower every day, right? About our diet, about taking care of our homes. But I want to spend a few minutes just talking about how we set goals, right? And many of you may have heard of SMART goals before, but I find that a review is always helpful. Okay, so we're going to go and we're going to talk about each of these elements that leads to kind of a good goal, right? So it needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Okay, so let's talk about each of these, right? So when we set a goal, we want it to be specific. So it should be able to answer those questions. What do I want to accomplish? Why is this important, right? Who's going to do it? Do I have the resources I need, right? So if I want to increase my engagement in activity, I want to say something like, for this month, right, for the next month, I will walk for 30 minutes a day, 30 minutes, 3 times a week in City Park, right? So that is specific. It tells me kind of what I want to do. I want to walk. Who's doing it? It's me, right? Where am I doing it? I'm doing it over in the park, right? And it's measurable. Oh, it must have been, okay. So we want to be able to track it, to monitor our progress, right? So we know when our goal is complete. So if I say for this month, for 30 days, 3 times a week, I'm going to be walking for 30 minutes, right? I can track that on my calendar, right? I know if I'm doing it or not, right? And that's very different than if I said for my goal, I want to be more active or I want to get in shape, right? How do we measure that? What does that mean? Okay, oops, I didn't realize I added animation here. Okay, but yeah, how will I know when it's accomplished? After 30 days, I'll take a look at my calendar and I'll see if I walked 3 times a week for 30 minutes. Okay. Oh, sorry about this. I didn't realize these were animated. Okay. And then we want to say, is this goal achievable? Right? Is this something that I can actually do? If I've never walked more than 5 minutes at a time, and I say my goal is to walk 30 minutes 3 times a week, that may be a bit of a stretch, right? I may want to start by saying this week, I'm going to walk 5 minutes, 3 days, right? We want this to be something that is within, that's something that we can do, but it's a bit of a stretch, right? We're moving a little bit further. And a good rule of thumb to use for that is to say, like, is this something that I think I can accomplish 90% of the time? Right? So we want to set ourselves up for success here. Right? When we set goals, we tend to really get extreme sometimes. Right? I did this when I was like, okay, so for my time in between jobs, there's no reason I can't exercise 2 hours a day. I mean, I guess there's, I have the time, but I'm not going to go from doing 30 to 40 minutes a day to 2 hours a day, probably without hurting myself and then having to take some time off, right? So it might just be saying I want to exercise every day for 45 minutes. Haven't done, not really hitting that yet. but we want it to be something that we can actually do, okay? Next, we want this to be relevant, right? We want this to matter for us. We want it to be connected to our meaning and purpose, right? When I say I want to walk 30 minutes 3 times a week for a month, that's because I want to be able to keep up with my kid when he's playing outside, right? Because being an engaged parent matters to me, right? We want to connect it to those, those reasons why, right? Why do we want to be in better shape? It's not just for the sake of being in shape, right? We do it because there's something we want to be healthy for, our relationships, nature, service, right? That's why it matters, right? So looking at, does it move me closer, to that person, you imagined when I had my magic wand out, right? Does this move you towards that person or away from that person, or does it just keep you stuck? And I think that is a fair, metric to use in this. And then again, when we set goals, they should be time bound, right? It should be about like, something I can do now, not just someday I'm going to get into shape. It's this month, I'm going to move more, and I'm going to do it by walking 30 minutes in the park 3 times a week, right? And in a month, I will be able to look and see how I did on that goal, right? Rather than setting these kind of nebulous, someday I will do this, right? Eventually I will start making smoothies for breakfast, right? We want it to be like, this week I will make a smoothie, and I will do it by going to the grocery store tomorrow and buying the ingredients, and then the next, and waking up 20 minutes earlier so I can make it, right? So it's really about just, being specific. And we know from the research that is doing these things, increases the likelihood that you will do them. Okay. But also, one of the things we really want to remember is the importance of self-compassion in establishing structure, right? We want to be flexible, right? We don't want to be rigid and harsh. Oftentimes, when we want to do something, we come down really hard on ourselves, right? I said I was going to walk 3 times this week. I didn't get to it. I failed, right? I'm never going to make a change, right? That tends to be the language we use when we're reflecting on our goals if we don't meet them. And the thing is, that doesn't really work, and it doesn't feel good, right? It doesn't make us any more likely to do them if we're harsh on ourselves. And in fact, the opposite, if we are kind to ourselves, and if we say like, okay, that happens, what are you going to do now? Maybe I need to set a different goal. Maybe that really isn't in line with what I want to do, right? How can I better align my activity, with my purpose, right? So we want to practice, and this is a really hard thing to do, to respond to ourselves with compassion and kindness. I think one, just a helpful strategy in this is to say like, how would you talk to yourself if like what if you talk to yourself like you were talking to someone you care about, like a friend or a family member, right? If your child came to you and said, I wanted to walk every day last week and I didn't do it because I got busy with work, I'm such a failure. Would you say, yeah, you're right? No, right? You would say, okay, that's all right. That happens, right? You would respond with kindness. You would respond with compassion. So we want to practice doing that with ourselves. So I want to just kind of like plant that seed. The next time you notice yourself kind of being harsh or judgmental with yourself, I think say, would I say this to someone I cared about? Right? Because we're often, I think sometimes the things we say to ourselves are pretty surprising in how harsh they are. And we'd never say that to another person. Okay. And then I think also, when we're establishing structure, we also want to include a plan for accountability, right? We'll create our plan, and I think just saying, am I going to track my activity in my calendar, right? And I think saying, is there anybody you want to bring in to this? Am I going to tell my friends? Am I going to tell my partner? Am I going to post about it on my social media? And I'm going to say, almost challenge us, would you be willing to share it with us right now? Okay. So this is my challenge to you. Okay. It is for you to think about what you want to do. Right? Is this something that is connected to the things that are meaningful to you? Right? Is this connected to your purpose? Is it SMART? Right? Is it specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound? And what is the first step that you need to take? And can you tell us? Can you tell us those things that you want to add in to your life, those habits you want to create? Can you say it out loud, even though you're on mute in your home? Can you say the thing that you want to do? Say it out loud. Say it without needing to justify it, without needing to explain yourself. Just say the thing that you want to do. And would you be willing to share it in the chat? I know the chat's been going, and I think we're going to move on to answering questions now. But I would just want to say, to look at, what does it feel like to commit, right? To commit to an action, to be willing to make a change. So that's my challenge for you. I want to thank you all for coming today and, making the time. And I'm happy to, take questions, and I'd love your comments. So yeah, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kolba. We do have a couple questions. So first of all, can you share with us, are there any tools or maybe apps that would help set specific goals?
Oh my goodness, that's such a good question. I'm sure there are some. I can take a look, and I can send that out to
Perfect. We can share that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's, I'm so I tend to use a whiteboard. Yeah. I really like writing down paper. So I think it's if you are somebody who uses an app, I think apps are great. If you're somebody who uses a date book and a planner, I think use that. But I will, I'll do some searching, and I'll get back to everybody on that.
Terrific. And then any other strategies in sharing, you said the importance of sharing it for accountability, but any ideas kind of around, not so big as maybe I'm sharing it on my entire social media platform, but instead, who might I share that with, to find that accountability partner? How do I do that? Sure.
And this is, it's about integrating it into your life, right? So looking at, who are the people you talk to, right? And what are you comfortable with, right? And so it's that same thing about when we're setting goals, right? We want it to be something that's within our realm, but maybe stretches us a little bit outside of that, right? So if I'm somebody, over the course of the pandemic, right, I've, our neighborhoods become a lot closer, right? We stand in our front yards, we talk to each other. And I've actually started kind of sharing my goals with my neighbors, right? This is something I'm working on, right? It's a little bit of a stretch for me because I'm, fairly socially anxious, and, but it's just kind of pushing me a little bit more. I think all levels of accountability are helpful. I think saying it to yourself is meaningful. Writing it down for yourself is meaningful. And then you can take that with sharing it with somebody in your family, sharing it with a friend, sharing it with a neighbor. Some people are more comfortable sharing it with people who they don't, who they don't even know, right? Just posting it out there. So I think it's really saying, what are you comfortable with, and what is going to make it more likely that you're going to do it?
Absolutely. So really very individual about comfort level.
I think that this is, there is no one right way to do this. It's really about taking these kind of broad strokes and bringing them into your life and your style.
So as we're trying to figure out kind of our meaning and purpose in life, which is huge, right?
Yes, yeah.
That's a huge question. But it feels like, we have these life things that happen, these circumstances that always kind of get in the way of that. Are there any strategies that we can use to kind of park those still, even though they're happening, but kind of park those to the side so that we can really stay focused on figuring out who we are, what we want to be, where we want to go, those important meaning and purpose questions?
Absolutely. And I think part of it, and you're probably hearing this in your other talks too, is just awareness really is the most important step, So noticing the things that get in the way that we always put in front of the things that we really want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just, once we notice it, then we can make changes, right? Because a lot of these things, we do it so automatically, right? These things pop up, they get our attention and we go, right? Mm-hmm. But it's if you just kind of take a pause, notice before you respond, to say like, do I really need to do this now? Do I need to vacuum when I really, connecting with this friend is something that really matters to me, right? Because being a friend is a value of mine, and my goal was every week I am going to call someone I love, right? And so just like making that choice, right? And saying that like the vacuuming can wait because who I am matters. Mm-hmm. And just allowing yourself, giving yourself that permission to take care of yourself.
Absolutely. And that goes to kind of the pacing that you talked about, right? Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
That we don't have to rush to get the vacuuming done, and not connect with our friends, because in our mind we have to clean our house, Right. So I think that pacing part of the presentation too is so important because life sends us on this overdrive constantly.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Slow down. Yeah.
And then I think it makes us feel paralyzed too.
Yeah. Then we're not doing anything, right? We then are stuck kind of in that motion. There have been some great goals that are coming in. So I want to share them with you, Dr. Cole, because I'm not sure that you can see the chat, but we've got, developing a better sleep schedule, dedicating more time for reading and finishing books. There's also some great suggestions about the app. So the earlier question about that, we've got some great suggestions. So I encourage all the attendees to really skim through the chat room and take note of some of the suggestions that are coming in from the other attendees here. So we've got someone who would like to lose some weight, and then more apps, which is terrific. Oh, playing the piano. Oh, I'd like to learn that. That would be awesome. So now all that Dave needs is a teacher. So maybe they're in the chat room, someone can put in some resources for a piano teacher.
That's great.
So thank you everyone for putting in these suggestions of the apps. That is terrific. And then for sharing with us your goals. You're being accountable to the group that today convened for this presentation, which is the first step, right?
Absolutely.
So, there was a question about the handout. So the handout was attached to the email that had the login information, but we're also going to resend it with the email that follows up from this presentation with the evaluation link. So make sure to look at the attachments on those emails, which is also a great reminder. Please, please, please just it's no more than about 30 seconds to a minute to fill out the evaluation. Those are hugely helpful for all of us and the presenters, because it helps us also certainly improve these presentations, but better yet, get ideas from you about what it is that you want to hear for future presentations. And in the fall, the theme for the fall sessions is going to be all about healthy me, healthy you. So we're taking a much deeper dive into some of these topics that we've introduced during this more resiliency training session. So watch for those in the fall. So with that, I think we've got one last goal, which is a smoothie twice a week for 8 weeks, which
I love it.
I love that. So Amy, make one for all of us, because I would love to do that as well. So with that, Dr. Kola, thank you so much for putting a little more structure, but allowing us some flexibility in all of that as well.
Awesome. And I will look up apps and send them to you.
And look at some of these app suggestions, because they're terrific. So, and with that, we will see all of you next Thursday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. And we're going to talk about healthy cognitive living. So Have a great rest of the day. Enjoy this weekend if you're in Denver. It's supposed to be 85 degrees, which I can't believe. And we'll see you next Thursday. Take care, everyone. Thanks again.